What's the one thing you'd say to your younger self before your first betrayal?
Imagine scrolling through your social media feed on what should be a day of celebration, only to find the silence from your closest family echoing louder than any notification chime, prompting you to channel that profound neglect into a bold declaration of self-worth by investing every hard-earned savings into a serene beach house retreat, then broadcasting it online with the unapologetic boundary of excluding those who have overlooked you for 5 consecutive years, only for the initial wave of parental comments to crash in like an unexpected storm, unraveling the fragile peace you thought you had secured and igniting a cascade of confrontations that force you to question the very foundations of loyalty and resentment built over decades of unspoken disappointments. For me, Emily Hargrove, a 42-year-old graphic designer navigating the solitary rhythms of life in suburban Cleveland after a messy divorce that left me questioning my place in the world, that exact scenario unfolded. On the morning of my latest unacknowledged birthday, transforming what could have been another quiet evening of self-pity into the catalyst for a life-altering act of defiance that would ripple through my family like aftershocks from an emotional earthquake. It all began 5 years earlier, right after I relocated back to Ohio from the bustling anonymity of Chicago, hoping that returning to familiar ground would mend the fraying threads of familial bonds strained by my ex-husband's betrayals and the relentless demands of a freelance career that often kept me glued to my screen long into the night. Yet instead of the warm embrace I anticipated, my parents Robert and Linda seemed perpetually distracted by their own routines, Dad immersing himself in weekend golf outings that stretched into full-day escapes, Mom coordinating elaborate book club gatherings that conveniently overlapped with personal milestones, while my brother Mark chased one entrepreneurial venture after another, each more precarious than the last, and my sister Sarah offered sporadic acknowledgments that felt as obligatory as a forwarded chain email, leaving me to absorb the oversight year after year with a growing sense of invisibility that chipped away at the resilient spirit I had cultivated through years of independent problem-solving. By the time the fifth birthday dawned without so much as a text or a call, I had transformed that accumulating hurt into a deliberate strategy of financial autonomy, siphoning portions of my irregular income from designing logos and marketing materials for small businesses into a dedicated savings account that represented not just monetary security, but a tangible symbol of reclaiming control in a life where relationships had proven unreliable, much like the way so many Americans in their mid-40s, juggling mortgages, career plateaus, and the quiet dread of aging parents' dependencies, begin to prioritize personal legacies over inherited expectations. That particular morning, as gray skies hung over Lake Erie like a perpetual reminder of unfulfilled promises, I sat alone in my modest apartment surrounded by sketches of uncommissioned artwork and the faint scent of yesterday's takeout, staring at the digital calendar that mocked me with its circled date, and in a surge of impulsive clarity fueled by equal parts exhaustion and empowerment, I navigated to the real estate website I had bookmarked during countless late-night scrolls, dreaming of warmer horizons beyond the Midwest's unforgiving winters, where the allure of Gulf Coast properties promised not only physical escape, but a psychological reset for someone weary of being the reliable yet overlooked sibling who always showed up for holidays with thoughtful contributions while receiving indifference in return. The listing that captured my attention was for a charming 2-bedroom beach house in Gulf Shores, Alabama, featuring sun-faded blue shutters framing wide windows that overlooked rolling dunes and the endless expanse of the Gulf of Mexico, its modest price tag aligning precisely with the $15,000 I had painstakingly accumulated through skipped vacations, thrifty grocery runs, and the occasional side gig editing photos for local realtors, prompting me to hesitate only briefly before submitting an offer that bypassed any consultation with family, as if voicing it aloud might invite their habitual dismissal to sabotage the moment. The acceptance arrived via email just hours later, sending a thrill through me that rivaled the excitement of my college acceptance letter decades prior, and by late afternoon, with virtual keys essentially in hand pending a swift closing process, I felt a liberating rush that propelled me to open my Instagram account, where I had gradually built a community of a few thousand followers through posts about creative workflows, midlife reinventions, and the subtle arts of boundary setting for women. Rediscovering their voices after relational upheavals, and upload an evocative image of the property bathed in golden sunset light, the waves appearing to applaud the structure's sturdy presence against the horizon, accompanying it with a caption that distilled years of pent-up frustration into a concise yet piercing statement. For the 5th year in a row, my family forgot my birthday, so I spent my savings on this beach house instead. Gift to myself, family not welcome. Followed by hashtags that evoked themes of self-love, independence, and unyielding personal growth, then hitting post before pouring myself a generous glass of inexpensive Merlot to toast the audacity of it all. Watching as the initial responses flooded in like a digital tide of solidarity from acquaintances who had long sensed my quiet endurance of familial slights. At first, the feedback was an intoxicating bomb, with old high school friends from our Ohio roots commenting phrases like, "You deserve this queen-level move after all you've carried," and professional contacts sharing anecdotes of their own overlooked milestones that mirrored the universal struggle of adult children feeling sidelined in the shuffle of parental priorities and sibling ambitions, even drawing in unexpected supporters who recounted similar tales of pouring resources into solo adventures as a form of quiet rebellion against the expectations of blood ties that often felt more obligatory than nourishing, allowing me to inject a thread of wry humor into my replies, such as acknowledging one particularly relatable story with, "If forgetting birthdays were an Olympic sport, my family would take gold, time for me to claim my own podium," which elicited laughs and further shares that amplified the post's reach into the thousands. Yet as the evening deepened and the wine warmed my resolve, the tone of the comments began to shift subtly, introducing an undercurrent of conflict that mirrored the internal tug-of-war I had suppressed for so long. Starting with the familiar profile pictures of my parents appearing in the thread, "Mom's first," her message laced with a mix of wounded surprise and authoritative concern that read, "Emily, this is deeply hurtful and uncalled for. Please call us immediately so we can discuss this like adults," followed swiftly by Dad's more blunt entry stating, "What kind of daughter broadcasts family matters online like this? It's embarrassing, and we're not amused. Expect a call from us soon," each word landing with the weight of accumulated history, stirring not outright remorse, but a prickling uncertainty about whether my bold exclusion had crossed into territory that exposed vulnerabilities I hadn't fully anticipated, especially as extended relatives began piling on with their own interpretations, some defending the post as a necessary way-up call while others labeled it an overreaction born of misplaced blame, all of which made my solitary celebration feel suddenly exposed under the harsh light of public scrutiny. I continued scrolling through the mix of empowerment anthems and dissenting voices, the supportive influx providing a satisfying counterpoint to the familial backlash that hinted at the clever revenge I had unwittingly initiated by turning personal pain into a communal narrative. But as midnight approached and the notifications showed no signs of slowing, my phone vibrated with a direct message from my brother Mark that cut through the noise like a sharpened blade. Its contents reading, "Sis, this post is nothing short of explosive, and you're playing with fire you don't fully understand. Check your email right away, because what I sent will change how you see everything we've been through." That direct message from Mark lingered on my screen like an unwelcome shadow cast by the setting sun over my apartment window, its ominous warning about the email attachment pulling me into a vortex of reluctant curiosity that battled against the triumphant haze still enveloping me from the beach house purchase and the viral surge of my Instagram post, prompting me to set aside the half-empty wine glass and navigate to my inbox where the subject line, "Before you burn bridges, remember this," stared back accusingly, attached to a digital scan of an old family photograph from our shared album that captured a moment of unfiltered joy from nearly 2 decades ago when I had graduated from community college in Ohio with a degree in graphic design. Standing proudly on the makeshift stage in my rented cap and gown surrounded by the entire Hargrove clan, parents beaming with genuine pride under the auditorium lights, Mark clapping enthusiastically from the front row despite his teenage awkwardness, and Sarah snapping photos with her first digital camera, all of us connected in that instant by a tangible sense of support that now felt as distant as the Gulf Coast horizon I was about to chase. The accompanying note from Mark elaborating that this image served as a reminder of how we once showed up for each other before life's relentless currents began eroding those bonds through a series of mutual withdrawals that neither side had fully acknowledged until my exclusionary post thrust it all into the unforgiving glare of public commentary. As I enlarged the photo on my laptop screen, tracing the lines of younger faces unmarred by the resentments that had accumulated like unchecked debt over the years, a subtle twist of self-doubt infiltrated my resolve, forcing me to confront the possibility that my family's pattern of forgotten birthdays might stem not solely from neglect, but from a reciprocal drift where I had gradually distanced myself after the divorce, skipping family gatherings to nurse private wounds and responding to their occasional outreach with curt replies that signaled my unavailability, thereby creating a feedback loop of indifference that mirrored the quiet isolations many midlife Americans endure when balancing demanding careers with the fading echoes of childhood intimacies. Yet, even as that realization prickled uncomfortably, I refused to let it dismantle the empowering foundation of my decision, instead channeling the emerging uncertainty into preparations for the road trip south that would transport me to the beach house sanctuary I had claimed as my rightful inheritance of self-sufficiency. Over the next 2 days, I methodically packed my sedan with essentials drawn from a life pared down to necessities, rolling suitcases filled with lightweight linens suited for coastal humidity, boxes of art supplies to sustain my freelance workflow amid the inspirational seascapes, and a cooler stocked with simple provisions like fresh fruit and bottled water to fuel the 18-hour drive along interstate corridors that wound through the heartland's patchwork of farmlands and truck stops, where I paused at roadside diners reminiscent of those classic American pit stops featured in road trip lore, striking up light conversations with fellow travelers over plates of greasy eggs and strong coffee that provided fleeting camaraderie and a humorous respite from the persistent buzz of my phone, which now overflowed with voicemails and texts from mom and dad pleading for dialogue in voices laced with a mixture of concern and frustration that hinted at their struggle to reconcile my public boundary setting with the image they held of their dutiful daughter, who had always been the one to bridge gaps rather than widen them. The journey itself became a meditative procession southward, windows cracked to allow the shifting sense of pine forests giving way to magnolia blooms and eventual salty breezes to infiltrate the car. My playlist cycling through anthems of reinvention like Bruce Springsteen's gravelly odes to breaking free that resonated deeply with the demographic of 35 to 65-year-olds grappling with midlife pivots, interspersed with podcasts on personal empowerment that reinforced my choice to invest in the beach house as a clever act of reclamation rather than impulsive spite, allowing me to revel in the online support that continued to pour in through notifications pinging every few miles, where followers shared their own narratives of familial oversights transformed into catalysts for solo adventures, their encouragement weaving a digital safety net that softened the edges of isolation while I dodged the escalating calls by silencing my ringer and composing mental retorts to the familial pleas that painted me as the antagonist in a drama I had scripted for liberation. Upon finally arriving at the Gulf Shores address as dusk painted the sky in hues of amber and indigo, the sight of the beach house materializing at the end of a quiet lane, its weathered facade welcoming me with an aura of quiet resilience against the rhythmic crash of waves, ignited a profound sense of arrival that momentarily eclipsed the lingering echoes from the photograph, prompting me to unload my belongings under the emerging stars and settle into the space with a sense of ownership that felt both exhilarating and defiant, hanging sheer curtains that filtered the moonlight across bare walls and arranging my sketch pad on the porch table overlooking the dunes, where the first true night of solitude allowed me to breathe deeply without the weight of expectations pressing down. Yet the peace proved fleeting as the next morning brought a renewed barrage of familial outreach, with mom's texts evolving into more insistent tones that blended emotional appeals with subtle accusations of ingratitude for the sacrifices they claimed to have made over the years. while Dad's messages carried a gruff undertone of disappointment that evoked memories of his stern lectures during my rebellious teens, all of which I sidestepped by immersing myself in the house's details, exploring the creaky floorboards that told stories of previous owners' joys and scrubbing the salt-kissed windows to frame clearer views of the horizon, until the pull of witty revenge drew me back to Instagram, where I crafted an update to my original post featuring a candid shot of the key in my palm against the backdrop of turquoise waters, captioning it with a sassy yet subtle boundary reinforcement that read, "Day 1 in my self-gifted haven. Waves whispering approval, and for those wondering, boundaries aren't walls, they're waves that carry you forward, family edition optional," which elicited an explosion of fresh engagement from the audience. Supporters amplifying the humor in my nautical metaphor, while critics debated the pettiness of exclusion in family dynamics, providing that satisfying layer of validation laced with lighthearted jabs at the oversight pattern without descending into overt confrontation, much like the clever comebacks shared in online forums where adults navigate similar relational minefields with a mix of sarcasm and sincerity. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the sand, I allowed myself a moment of reflective laughter over the absurdity of it all, picturing Dad's furrowed brow as he deciphered my post amid his morning coffee ritual back in Ohio. Yet the humor masked a growing undercurrent of conflict when another notification arrived, this one a forwarded chain from Sarah containing snippets of old emails from years past where I had promised to contribute more to family expenses during Mark's business lows, subtly suggesting that my withdrawal had initiated the very distance I now decried, planting seeds of dilemma that made the beach house feel less like an unassailable fortress and more like a temporary buoy in turbulent waters, especially as evening approached and a distant rumble of tires on gravel announced an uninvited arrival, the rental car's headlights piercing the twilight to reveal Mark stepping out with purposeful strides, his expression a complex brew of brotherly concern and unresolved tension that promised to shatter the fragile equilibrium I had only just begun to establish in this hard-won retreat. Mark's unexpected emergence from the rental car in the fading twilight of my beach house driveway transformed the serene coastal evening into an abrupt confrontation that shattered the illusion of solitude I had so carefully curated through the arduous drive-in. The initial hours of unpacking amid the soothing symphony of distant waves, his approach along the sandy path carrying the weight of familial presumption that immediately ignited a defensive spark within me, prompting me to step forward from the porch with arms crossed in a posture of unyielding resolve while questioning his audacity in disregarding the explicit boundaries outlined in my viral post that had already drawn thousands into this personal saga of reclamation and resentment. As he closed the distance with that familiar stride honed from years of navigating Ohio's suburban sidewalks and now transplanted to this Alabama shoreline, his expression blended brotherly affection with an undercurrent of reproach that made my stomach twist in anticipation of the arguments sure to follow, especially since his arrival forced me to confront the reality that my clever act of exclusion via social media might provoke physical incursions rather than virtual ones. Echoing the way many in our age bracket experience, the collision of digital declarations with the tangible persistence of blood relations who refuse to be sidelined by online edicts. We exchanged terse greetings on the porch steps, where the salt-laced breeze carried hints of his cologne mixed with the faint exhaust from his drive, and he wasted no time launching into a monologue about the familial turmoil my post had unleashed back home. Mom pacing the kitchen with tear-streaked cheeks while Dad muttered about ungrateful children over his evening news, extended relatives dividing into camps of sympathy and judgment at impromptu gatherings that amplified the drama like neighborhood gossip chains in Midwestern cul-de-sacs, all of which painted me as the instigator of unnecessary division in a family already frayed by the economic pressures that plague so many American households navigating retirement uncertainties and adult children's diverging paths. I ushered him inside reluctantly, the creak of the screen door underscoring my hesitation as we settled in the sparsely furnished living room with its views of the darkening dunes, where I poured him a glass of water from the kitchen to buy a moment's composure before countering his pleas for reconciliation with deflections laced in wry humor that highlighted the irony of his uninvited pilgrimage. remarking how his sudden appearance felt like a plot twist from one of those family reunion movies, where the black sheep returns only to upend the script. Yet beneath the light-hearted jab lay a growing uncertainty about whether my steadfast refusal to engage softened the blow of their oversights or merely entrenched the isolation that my beach house investment was meant to alleviate. As the conversation deepened under the soft glow of a single lamp, Mark revealed subtle clues about the underlying strains that had contributed to those 5 consecutive forgotten birthdays, mentioning offhand Dad's recent entanglement in unwise investments, real estate flips gone sour during the market dips that hit Ohio hard a few years back, draining resources and attention in ways that made personal celebrations feel like luxuries amid mounting bills. A revelation that introduced a twist of empathy I hadn't anticipated, forcing me to reconsider if their distractions stemmed from deliberate neglect or the survival instincts that define middle-aged resilience in the face of financial tempests. Familiar to viewers tuning into stories of everyday perseverance. This hint of vulnerability in our parents humanized them in my eyes, stirring a dilemma that made audiences potentially disagree with my unyielding stance, as it suggested my self-gifted haven might overlook the shared hardships that bind families through unspoken sacrifices rather than outright support. Yet I pressed on with clever boundary enforcements, producing a hastily printed "no trespassing" sign from my printer and affixing it to the gate with a flourish that elicited a reluctant chuckle from him, serving as my immediate revenge in the form of tangible wit that underscored the seriousness of my declaration without escalating to outright hostility. The exchange evolved into a tentative truce as we stepped out for a walk along the beach, the cool sand shifting underfoot while the moon rose over the gulf to cast silvery paths on the water, where Mark shared anecdotes of family life in my absence. Sarah's promotion at her accounting firm overshadowed by worries about Mom's health and his own startup struggles that had pulled everyone into a web of mutual dependence I had partially escaped through my freelance flexibility, planting seeds of guilt that warred with the empowering solitude I savored in this new chapter, all while I navigated the internal conflict of wanting to bridge the gap yet fearing it would dilute the hard-won independence symbolized by the house keys jingling in my pocket. Seizing the moment for further revenge that felt both satisfying and strategic, I pulled out my phone to initiate an impromptu Instagram live stream during our stroll, framing the scenic backdrop with careful angles that captured the essence of liberation while subtly shading the dynamics of familial intrusion through narrated asides like embracing the peace of a self-made escape, where every wave reminds you that some visits are best appreciated from afar. Drawing in hundreds of viewers who flooded the chat with cheers for my poised defiance and humorous endorsements of boundary keeping, even as Mark hovered awkwardly just off camera, his discomfort adding an unintended layer of authenticity that amplified the post's engagement but also deepened my isolation by turning a private reconciliation attempt into public spectacle. The stream concluded on a high note of virtual applause that bolstered my resolve, yet as we returned to the house with the tide's murmur fading behind us, my phone erupted with an incoming call from an unrecognized number bearing the Ohio area code. And upon answering, Mom's voice pierced the night air with urgent insistence, declaring, "Emily, we're not far now, your father," and I followed Mark's rental south because words on a screen aren't enough. We're at the edge of your property, and this ends with us talking face to face, whether you like it or not. Mom's voice crackling through the phone from the property's edge carried an unyielding determination that resonated across the short distance between us like the persistent pull of the incoming tide, compelling me to end the call abruptly and step back onto the porch where Mark stood with a sheepish expression that betrayed his complicity in their pursuit, the headlights of their familiar Buick now illuminating the gravel path as my parents emerged from the vehicle with purposeful steps that transformed my private coastal haven into an impromptu arena for familial reckoning, their arrival forcing me to navigate the immediate dilemma of whether to enforce the boundaries I had so publicly declared or yield to the gravitational force of blood ties that have long defined the intricate dances of obligation and resentment in American families stretched across generations of economic ups and downs. As they approached the gate with Mom clutching a white bakery box that hinted at conciliatory Gestures rooted in traditions of homemade apologies and Dad's face etched with the weary resolve of a man who had weathered job losses and market crashes in his quest for stability. I felt the uncertainty swell within me like the Gulf's gathering waves, questioning if my beach house investment represented a pinnacle of self-empowerment or a selfish barricade against the vulnerabilities that had silently eroded our connections over the years, especially since their presence evoked memories of childhood summers in Ohio, where similar unannounced visits had once brought joy rather than intrusion. Now complicated by the viral undercurrents of my post that had amplified every slight into a national conversation on adult autonomy versus parental entitlement. Mark opened the gate without my consent, ushering them forward in a gesture of mediation that irked me yet underscored the collective pressure to reconcile, leading us all inside the living room where the air hung heavy with the scent of fresh-baked cake mingling with the ever-present brine from the open windows, prompting me to distribute slices on paper plates as a temporary truce while the arguments began to unfold in layers of accusation and defense that peeled back the superficial neglect to reveal deeper fissures born from mutual failures. Seated around the coffee table that I had salvaged from a local flea market to symbolize my bootstrapped new beginning, the conversation ignited with Mom's tearful recounting of the emotional toll my Instagram declaration had exacted on the family back in Cleveland, where neighbors whispered about the Hargrove drama, and old friends from church circles debated the merits of such public airing of private grievances, her words laced with pleas for understanding that highlighted how their oversight of my birthdays stemmed not from malice, but from the overwhelming fog of personal crises like Dad's ill-fated ventures into speculative real estate that had nearly cost them their home 5 years prior. A revelation that twisted the narrative I had constructed in my mind and introduced a dilemma that might make listeners pause in their support for my stance, wondering if my pursuit of solitary bliss overlooked the quiet desperations that bind midlife parents to their survival modes at the expense of nurturing adult children who drift into independence without fully grasping the sacrifices involved. Dad chimed in with gruff details about those investments, promising flips on foreclosed properties in the Rust Belt that instead swallowed their savings and demanded round-the-clock attention, coinciding precisely with the dates of my unremembered birthdays and forcing priorities that felt like betrayals in hindsight, while Sarah joined via video call from her apartment, her face filling my laptop screen with a mix of frustration and solidarity as she accused me of contributing to the rift by reneging on an old promise to help bail out the family during Mark's startup collapse a few years back, when I had wired a modest sum post-divorce only to withdraw further support amid my own financial tightrope. A twist that cast my withdrawal as the initial catalyst for their emotional retreat and prompted me to reflect on how my choices had mirrored theirs in a cycle of self-preservation that now clashed against the empowering isolation I had bought with my savings. The light vulgarity of the moment surfaced in my internal quip about the absurdity of trading birthday cards for balance sheets, yet it masked the growing conflict as their stories humanized the neglect, making my clever exclusions feel a touch uncharitable to those who might empathize with the parents' unspoken burdens, all while I steered the dialogue with humorous deflections like joking that the cake's extra frosting symbolized the layers of excuses we all piled on over time. Sensing the need for revenge that balanced wit with assertion amid the escalating tensions, I revived the dormant family group chat on my phone and composed a message broadcast to all present and virtual participants, threading it with pointed observations wrapped in playful roasts such as gathering in my self-funded slice of paradise to unpack 5 years of forgotten dates. Turns out IOUs go both ways, but from now on, let's trade apologies for actual plans instead of phantom investments. Who's baking next year? Accompanied by a filtered photo of us around the table that turned our expressions into comically exaggerated caricatures, the result eliciting reluctant laughter from Dad and a groan from Sarah that diffused the immediate heat while delivering a satisfying sting of accountability without outright cruelty, reinforcing my boundaries in a way that felt cleverly communal rather than combative and drawing chuckles from the online echoes still buzzing in my notifications, where followers praised the savage family therapy vibe As the evening wore on with tentative agreements to communicate more openly and the visitors settling into the guest room despite my half-protested hospitality, the house's walls seeming to contract under the weight of their presence, I retreated to the kitchen under the pretense of tidying up, only to stumble upon an overlooked drawer while searching for extra linens, revealing a yellowed envelope tucked behind forgotten realtor paperwork, its faded postmark dating back to my 37th birthday and addressed in Dad's distinctive script to Emily, with regrets unspoken. The discovery sending a chill through me as I realized this hidden missive might hold the key to a long-buried secret directly linked to the pattern of oversights that had driven me to this defiant purchase, leaving me frozen in place with the weight of potential truths pressing down just as the household lights began to dim for the night. The envelope's discovery in the dim kitchen light during the hush of midnight transformed the beach house from a symbol of defiant isolation into a repository of concealed histories that demanded confrontation as dawn's first light filtered through the curtains, drawing me to the solitary stretch of shoreline where the Gulf's relentless tide mirrored the ebb and flow of revelations now crashing against the foundations of my long-held grievances, prompting me to clutch the faded letter while pacing the wet sand that clung to my bare feet like the persistent pull of unresolved questions about whether my family's pattern of forgotten birthdays arose from intentional dismissal or the protective silences that shield loved ones from shared burdens in the unforgiving landscape of midlife financial and emotional strains. As the sun crested the horizon, painting the waves in strokes of gold and crimson, the rustle of footsteps behind me announced the arrival of my parents, Mark and Sarah, who had risen early amid the awkward accommodations of the guest rooms, their faces a mosaic of apprehension and curiosity that betrayed their unspoken awareness of the envelope's existence. Mom reaching out tentatively to touch my arm while Dad's eyes fixed on the paper with the stoic regret of a man who had carried secrets through decades of providing for a family that now questioned his methods, all of which ignited the final confrontation in a circle on the beach where the cool morning air carried the faint salt tang that both soothed and sharpened the edges of our collective vulnerabilities. I unfolded the letter aloud, my voice steady yet laced with the tremor of dawning comprehension as Dad's words from 5 years past spilled forth, admitting the devastating loss of their nest egg to a fraudulent investment scheme that had masqueraded as a secure path to retirement security, coinciding with my 37th birthday when they chose silence over solicitation to spare me the weight of their despair amid my own post-divorce recovery, a twist that reframed their oversights not as apathy, but as acts of misguided sparing that intertwined with my own lapses, such as the ignored voicemails during that period when I had buried myself in work to avoid the echoes of my failed marriage, thereby fostering a mutual drift that escalated into the 5-year void I had weaponized through my viral post and the impulsive purchase of this coastal refuge. Sarah's contribution to the unfolding truth added layers of interpersonal complexity as she knelt to trace patterns in the sand, recounting how planned birthday surprises had faltered year after year not due to forgetfulness alone, but because subtle hints about the family's mounting debts, dropped in casual calls I had brushed off as small talk, when unheeded, leading to a resignation that mirrored my withdrawal after promising financial aid for Mark's ventures only to retract it when my freelance gigs dried up, creating a cycle of unmet expectations that now made audiences potentially side against my unyielding empowerment by highlighting how my beach house splurge, while a clever triumph of self-reliance, might have overlooked the reciprocal pains that define familial bonds strained by the economic realities facing 35 to 65-year-olds who juggle legacies of provision with the ache of adult estrangement. Dad's gruff interjection deepened the dilemma, revealing that the envelope represented one of several unsent missives intended to bridge the growing chasm without imposing further on what they perceived as my burgeoning independence, yet their pride had sealed the words away. Much like the way I had sealed off my hurts behind social media walls, prompting Mom to tear up as she confessed the emotional toll of watching their daughter flourish alone while they navigated near bankruptcy in silence, her vulnerability evoking the light vulgarity of my internal quip about trading Hallmark cards for hardship ledgers in a family ledger that balanced precariously between love and ledger keeping. The atmosphere thickened with uncertainty as these partial truths surfaced, leaving room for wonder about the what-ifs. Had earlier interventions on my part altered the trajectory, or was my boundary setting the necessary rupture that forced this reckoning? A question that stirred disagreement with my choices by underscoring the shared culpability in our relational erosion. All while the rising sun warmed the scene and hinted at potential mending without guaranteeing it. Seizing the moment for a culminating revenge that blended wit with weary wisdom, I gathered them closer and activated my phone for a final Instagram live stream framed against the vast ocean expanse, narrating the broadcast with a poised authenticity that declared, from forgotten dates to unearthed letters, this beach house journey reveals that self-gifts come wrapped in family threads we can't always cut clean. Visits welcome, takeovers not. Because true independence means choosing when to let the tide bring you back, the words delivering a satisfying roast of past silences through metaphorical shading that elicited nods from my kin and a flood of viewer reactions ranging from empathetic cheers to debates on forgiveness's fine line. The clever exposure turning private catharsis into communal reflection without fully capitulating to reconciliation, as hugs exchanged felt tentative and laced with the humor of our caricatured crab walk back to the house earlier that evoked reluctant laughter amid the gravity. As they prepared to depart in the Buick loaded with uneaten cake remnants and promises of biweekly check-ins that hung in the air like sea mist, the ambiguity settled over me like the retreating tide, leaving unanswered whether this partial unveiling would forge lasting bridges or merely postpone the next wave of rifts. With the envelope now tucked safely in my pocket serving as a talisman of truths half revealed that prompted lingering thoughts on the delicate balance between self-preservation and the enduring pull of blood, wondering if any of us truly escapes the undertow of what we withhold from those who shaped us, the beach house standing sentinel as both victory and question mark in the endless narrative of loyalty's quiet erosions.